The night was eerily quiet, save for the crackling of flames as they danced against the shadowy sky. A lone figure stood near the stake, trembling, not from the cold, but from the weight of the horrors that had unfolded. The screams of the condemned echoed in the wind, a chilling reminder of the madness that had gripped the town, an insatiable hunger for blood, for purity, for a twisted sense of justice. The woman at the stake, once a mother, a sister, now burned in the eyes of the crowd as the embodiment of evil. Her crime? Whispered curses and dark magic, or so they claimed. But even as the flames consumed her body, something far more terrifying still hung in the air. A curse, they said, would fall on the town, a darkness that would never lift. The witch was gone, but her shadow would remain. What none of them knew, standing in that smoke-filled square, was that the real terror wasn't the witch they had just executed. It was the hysteria, the madness that had swept through Europe, turning neighbors into enemies and innocents into guilt. The terror wasn't in the flames that devoured the accused, but in the knowledge that this would never be the end. More would burn. More would fall under suspicion. And even those in the crowd, clutching their rosaries and murmuring prayers, weren't safe from the creeping hand of paranoia. This is the story of the witch trials across Europe, a forgotten chapter in history where fear ruled and reason was swallowed by superstition. A time when mere accusations could seal your fate, and the line between justice and vengeance blurred beyond recognition. The witch hunts that swept across Europe in the 1500s were not the product of a single event, but a culmination of deep-rooted fear, religious extremism, and the desire for control. The continent, already in turmoil from the Protestant Reformation, was a powder keg of tension. Leaders of both the Catholic and Protestant factions sought ways to control their followers, to maintain their grip on power during this volatile time. And what better way to control the masses than by instilling fear? The fear of witches was not new to Europe. For centuries, isolated instances of witchcraft accusations had arisen, often as explanations for misfortunes like crop failures, illness, or sudden death. But as religious wars raged and political unrest grew, the number of witch trials surged. Both religious factions used witch hunts as a tool for purification. Witches, after all, were believed to be in league with the devil, corrupting society and causing destruction. The publication of the infamous Malleus Maleficarum in 1487 added fuel to this fire. This treatise detailed how to identify, try, and punish witches, legitimizing the idea that witchcraft was a tangible threat to society. As the text spread across Europe, so too did the panic. Communities eager to root out evil began turning on one another. Germany became ground zero for witch trials, experiencing some of the most brutal and widespread persecution. Between 1580 and 1650, thousands were accused, tortured, and burned at the stake. Entire villages were ravaged by the hysteria, as neighbor turned against neighbor, and no one was safe from suspicion. The trials were often sparked by a single accusation. One misstep, a quarrel with a neighbor, an odd illness, or a sudden death in the family, could lead to claims of witchcraft. And once an accusation was made, there was little hope for the accused. Torture was a common method of extracting confessions, with the rack, thumbscrews, and the dunking chair all part of the grim process. The trials in Würzburg and Bamberg, Germany, are among the most notorious, where even children as young as 9 were accused and executed. These trials took on a terrifying momentum of their own, and by the time they were over, entire communities had been devastated, their numbers decimated by the frenzy of fear. France was not immune to the witch-hunting mania, and perhaps one of the most chilling cases came from the town of Loudun in the 1630s. Here, a group of nuns claimed to have been possessed by demons, and suspicion quickly fell on a local priest, Urbain Grandier. The subsequent trial and execution of Grandier became a national spectacle, with the public eager to see the alleged witchcraft purged from their midst. In reality, Grandier was likely a scapegoat, a victim of political machinations and personal grudges. His trial, like many others, was not based on evidence or reason, but on fear, hysteria, and the desire for control. By the time the flames consumed him, the truth had long been buried under layers of paranoia and superstition. The brutality of the witch trials is hard to comprehend today. Women, men, and children accused of witchcraft were subjected to horrific torture to extract confessions. Common methods included the rack, a device used to stretch the accused, often dislocating joints in the process; water trials. Suspected witches were dunked in water. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent, though often dead by the time they were pulled from the water, burning at the stake. This was the fate that awaited many convicted witches. The flames that consumed their bodies were seen as a way to cleanse the soul and purge the evil from society. The trials weren't just about rooting out supposed evil. They were public spectacles meant to reinforce social order and remind people of the power held by religious and political authorities. As the flames rose, so did the fear, and with each execution, the hysteria deepened. Though men were also accused and executed during the witch trials, the overwhelming majority of those targeted were women. Why? In part because women, especially those who were poor, elderly, or living outside the norms of society, were seen as vulnerable and suspicious. Widows, midwives, and healers, women who didn't fit into traditional roles, became easy targets. In a patriarchal society, the trials were a means of controlling women, of reinforcing their subordinate position in the social order. Accusing a woman of witchcraft was not just about condemning her supposed magical practices, it was about silencing her, disempowering her, and reaffirming the dominance of men and the church. By the mid-1600s, the tide of the witch hunts began to recede, though not without leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The rise of Enlightenment thinking and the gradual shift towards rationalism meant that superstition and fear were no longer the driving forces in society. People began to question the legitimacy of the trials and the evidence used to convict so many innocent people. In England, the trial of Matthew Hopkins, the self-proclaimed witch-finder general, marked the beginning of the end for witch hunts in that country. Hopkins was responsible for the deaths of over 300 accused witches, but his methods were increasingly criticized as excessive and unfounded. His death in 1647 signaled a shift in public opinion, and soon after, witch trials began to decline. By the 1700s, most European countries had stopped prosecuting witches, though isolated cases continued into the 18th century. The witch hunts were finally over, but the scars they left behind would last for centuries.